What was the biggest scandal in your small town? Probably the Brown's Chicken Massacre link, where 7 people were murdered at the restaurant over a robbery. Case was cold for 9 years until the girlfriend on one of the murderers went to the police that he had confessed to her. He and his friend were eventually convicted through DNA and a confession. Surprised to see this here. I'm from the same town outside Chicago and went to the same HS as the 2 kids who were killed in the massacre went to. A friend of mine and I went down there after the story broke on ABC7 to watch the cops clean out the restaurant and the freezers. It was a matter of time before that strip mall closed and got partially demolished. I miss the German deli that used to be there. There was an anesthetist who worked at our local hospital and another hospital in a different town. He was rather well known among other doctors and known to be good at what he was doing. He only had a small problem with being addicted to painkillers and anesthetics. So to feed his addiction without getting caught, he shot up part of his patient's drugs before injecting the same needle into his patient. Thus went unnoticed until it was discovered that over 60 of his patients got infected with hepatitis and that he was the source for it. He was fired and his license revoked as far as I know, but the hospital's image still suffered quite a bit. Didn't even think to switch the needles. I don't know how it works at hospitals, but in the vet world, we can take the needles off normally. Even so, still screwed up he even did that at all. He should have gotten help. Not much of a scandal, but more of a tragic event. In my small cow town, there was a missing little girl that was found in a suitcase that was floating in a water canal. The culprit turned out to be her neighbor who also had a daughter the little girl would play with. The entire city was shocked as it hit really close to home. Sandra Cantu. Sounds similar to her case. An awful tragedy. Yes, this case was Sandra Cantu. I was in 8th grade at this time and I remembered the school being filled with parents to personally pick up their kids when they didn't find out Huckabee did it yet. I remember it was rumored a serial killer was on the loose, so of course parents who never pick up their kids before came to get their kids home safe. Mayor and several city councilors were taking kickbacks and bribes from demolition construction cleaning companies for cleanup contracts after a hurricane. Funded by FEMA, the companies would give the mayor and city councilors like a couple grand. Then the company would get FEMA funds in the tens of thousands to clean up destroy hurricane damaged property. Only the address given to FEMA and listed on the contract were fake or already cleared, so the companies got paid to do nothing. This is why we can't have nice things. But seriously, corruption is the evil that plagues every system. Anti-corruption laws should be the most strict and stringent laws we have. We should be thinking, is that really a fair punishment just for that when there's a corruption case, be it a public figure like the mayor in your example, or someone in a publicly traded company or non-profit skimming money? Corruption is corruption, and it should be stamped out at all levels. Corruption and the expectation of corruption literally destroys societies, like Afghanistan. Sarah Chase has written extensively about it, including corruption in America. Back in the 80s, during my senior year, one guy in my high school class got 4 girls pregnant in a month-long period. None of the girls were his girlfriend. The guy and his family left town during the middle of the night soon after that. He got 4 women pregnant in a month. Did people in the 80s know about condoms? What the duck? Small towns usually have the problem of the pharmacy employees being connected somehow to your own family. A lot of teens are incredibly paranoid and embarrassed about the prospect of buying condoms from someone they personally know or who could blab about it to their parents. So many of them go without out of embarrassment. I've often wondered if soft checkout lines have contributed to a falling birth rate. The mayor went to meet what he thought was an underage girl, but was really the cops. Around the same time, the son of the bazillionaire owner of the biggest company in town also got caught with an underage girl. Somehow right before trial she recanted and declined to prosecute. Something in the water down there. Something in the water down there. And I don't think it's the fountain of youth. College professor was found tied to a tree and burned months after he disappeared. Police ruled it a suicide. Suicide. I'm still not sure why they called it a suicide. Everyone knows there's no way it could be that. I recently heard that a documentary was made about it. Not sure where to locate it because it was some obscure group that made it. Link. Man. I really hope that was the story you Mounts and Rise was talking about, because it would be even more ducked up if the same thing happened multiple times. A local chemical manufacturer's mixing plant blew up and gassed the whole town. Everything was fine, just horrendously stinky, but it drew up a lot of controversy over their safety protocols. The company never rebuilt the plant, instead selling it to the city, which I'm pretty sure became a fireman training site, so all good in the end. A few members of a scummy local family broke into a bar, stole money, beer and peanuts. When they went to leave, realized there was a drunk patron sleeping out back on a picnic table. They, thinking he was a potential witness, bashed his head in with a hammer, threw his body into the back of their truck, drove the truck through the old railroad trail and dumped the body in a swamp. They were caught almost immediately because there was a trail of blood in their truck was covered in DNA, all over some cash and beer, and if he was sleeping they could have just ducking left him alone, but I guess you never know if he's just faking. Scumbags either way, or, better, stick something from the till in his pocket and leave a bunch of empties around him. They'll think the drunk did it. Missed opportunity here. This guy burgles. Gonna have to go with a woman who killed her 8-month pregnant women, cut out the baby, and tried to pass it off as hers. Edit. The one from my hometown was Kennewick, Wa circa 2008. Second edit. I should give an honorable mention to a more recent, less grisly scandal, and that would be the whole ghost cattle scam Easter Day was running. $250 million scam, and her accidental death that sure looks like a suicide. Yep. Happened in my town. The woman brought the baby to the hospital I now work at. I didn't work there at the time, but my supervisor did. Horrific story, and baby didn't survive. We had some kids arrested with guns and a hit list on their way to school. This was 6 months before Columbine, when someone threw a grenade to the police station. Damn. He went full Grand Theft Auto. In 2000, a girl's body was found on the steps of the local middle school. She had been beaten, raped, strangled, and burned. The officer that arrived at the scene was a rookie officer. Since he was the first in the scene, the police department made him in charge of the case. The case was massively botched. The murder had shocked the community and a lot of people were talking. Several years later, the police marked it as a cold case. A local woman was doing her own detective work. She reached out to a journalist from the UK. The journalist flew to meet the woman and investigate the murder and missteps by the police. They uncovered a massive cover-up. The local police department was hostile towards the journalist and local, to the point that the state FBI branch had to get involved to protect the investigation. Due to the police department's terrorizing behavior, they ended up getting investigated by the FBI. Apparently they knew who had committed the crime, a local drug dealer, who was cozy with the police. He eventually was arrested and sent to prison for life. The police department got a slap on the wrist. The journalist went back to the UK and the local woman moved to a nearby city. I'm from a very small town in Canada. Very quiet, nothing big ever came up, and it was a fairly tight-knit community. One day, an explosion went off in an apartment building. A 23-year-old single mother who also happens to be a quadriplegic was killed instantly. The case was eventually solved. The explosion was a gift-wrapped piped bomb left by her former financial advisor. He squandered hundreds of thousands of dollars from her and was convicted for it. He was then released on bail and then left the bomb. Wildst. My home county had a few historic covered bridges. They were quite the pride and joy of the area. Somebody burnt one down. Somebody else saw 3 young men do the deed. Now we all knew it was a trio of kids on my class. Like most schools we had cliques, 2 of which were the preps and the burnouts. The bridge burners were preps. One's dad was the county judge. One's mom was the primary real estate agent in town. This posed a dilemma, so the parents of the preps, including the judge, hatched a little plan. They gave 3 burnouts in my class $10,000 each mid-1980s and the promise of a light sentence of 6 months probation if they would plead guilty and take the fall. The burnouts agreed and took their money. The judge figured if the burnouts didn't hold up their rent he would make sure they found guilty anyway. So they showed up in court in front of the prep's judge dad. They not only didn't plead guilty, they had a speeding ticket dated the same day and time as the time the bridge burned. But the speeding ticket was for 70 miles away, and since all three were minors, all three were named in the ticket report. The judge had no choice but to dismiss the case, and the parents of the preps weren't even mad, because that was enough of an excuse to effectively end the whole investigation. Nobody got in trouble for it. It all just went away. The bridge was rebuilt. The placard was changed to say replica of a historic bridge. And for 10k those precious little boys didn't get a black mark in their records. A cop link murdered his wife and got away with it. Shockingly, he did it again to the next wife and now he gets to die in jail for it. The local drunk got into an argument with another regular at a popular bar, pulled out a gun, and shot the other guy to death. But that's not the scandal. The guy who died was apparently really nice and well liked in the community. The others in the bar were able to disarm and restrain the assailant until the police arrived. When the sheriff got there, he just said, "Looks like you all need a few more minutes with him. I'll come back later." So everyone in the bar grabbed what they could find and ended up beating the shooter to death. The sheriff reported it as self-defense and the security tapes disappeared. But the bar was crowded, so the real story got out. There were a few attempts to reopen the case or charge the sheriff and some of the bar patrons, but they were all squashed pretty quickly. The really interesting detail, in my opinion, is that there were some pretty strong rumors that the drunk had been sleeping with the wife of the man he killed and that he'd been attacked first. So the original shooting may have been in self-defense, but because there was no camera footage and all the witnesses were involved in killing the drunk, there's no way of knowing the truth. I'm originally from a town called Hyde, a few miles outside Manchester. Unfortunately, Hyde is famous for Harold Shipman, the once trusted GP who killed elderly patients by overdosing them with diamorphine. My grandma's neighbor Jack was one of his many victims. Side note, he also did my mum's ultrasound when she was pregnant with me. R.I.P. Jack. You were a wonderful man. I don't know if I would say scandal. It was more of a tragedy. This college girl got raped by another student and she laid down or just stood in front on the train tracks that ran right by the university. Those coal trains went fast, so I hope she didn't suffer. At my high school one year the whole basketball team held a kid down and took turns teabagging him. That was a pretty big thing. Not sure exactly what happened, but it was a big story around here for a while. Here link is a bit of the story, but they don't go into details. A few years before that, my school was one of the first in an experimental program where they had an undercover female cop act as a student for most of the school year. She had a BF and was even in the school yearbook. That was big as well. The only person in the whole school that knew was the superintendent. Here is the story on that link. High Times even had a small article about it at the time. At the time I had heard she even had slept with one of the students as well and did take drugs, even though the article says the cop didn't. A visitor shot the town's unofficial mascot, a tame buck, from his motel room. He couldn't believe his luck. He didn't even have to leave the comfort of his motel to hunt. The quarry came to him. Kind of a moron. Dare officer selling drugs that were evidence. My 5th grade dare officer hit on me at a high school football game while I was still in high school, and while we was on duty, I'd smoked and drank to pregame right before 2. While flirting he asked if his dare education worked. Buddy, no. On all counts. Dare has actually been proven to be one of the biggest failures ever foisted on school kids in the 90s. All it did was make kids really aware of drugs and totally not resist them. Well, yeah. When you tell people that weed and heroin are the exact same level of terrible and addictive, and then they try weed and it's not that bad. TF. Do you think is gonna happen next? A bunch of prominent married men were caught ducking each other during a hunting trip. Just dudes being dudes. I mean, if I can't take a weekend away from the family and enjoy nature and some consensual butt ducking, what's all this even about? Right, guys? Edit misspelled butt ducking. 5 high school football players were suspended for a hazing incident involving using icy hot on private parts of a freshman in the locker room. Dude burned down his small grocery store for an insurance scam. Everyone knew what happened, but he got away with it. High school kid caught drinking and driving. Local cop pulled him over, told him go home, so he did. Got some more beer from the fridge and went back to drinking and driving. Hit a disabled wheelchair-bound neighbor, who later died of his injuries. Kid was arrested and charged with manslaughter. Parents bailed him out of jail to await trial. Kid committed suicide. Kid shot and killed his mom because she told him to clean his room. Happened over summer and everyone returned to school kinda shell-shocked. And there were tons of advisory assemblies and notices encouraging people to seek help if they felt they had anger issues, anti-bullying rhetoric, etc. That did basically nothing. This was only last year, but I live in a pretty nice suburb of Columbus. Oh, where literally nothing happens. You usually get pulled over for a traffic violation with 3 cop cars because they are so bored. But a fairly well-known resident went missing. Husband said she went on a walk and never came back. Left her phone and keys. There were flyers with her picture everywhere. At my gym, local restaurants, giant signs near main streets in the area she could be, etc. Everyone knew her name. Months later, her body was found off a walking trail near one of the busiest streets in town. She had been tied up in a tree and the rope had come undone, finally exposing her. She was badly decayed, so she had more than likely been there the entire time. Husband was found guilty of her murder just recently. It was super sad even for the people that didn't know her personally, because it felt like everyone in town was trying to help look for her. I live in a small Russian city named Norchik. In 2005, we were attacked by terrorists. Mobile groups of terrorists of 5-6 people, with a total number of about 200 people, armed with various small arms, including RPG-7 and RPD, enter Norchik in cars from 2 directions. There are the first shootings between police officers and militants on the outskirts of the city. 14 civilians and 35 police officers and law enforcement agencies were killed. More than 240 people were injured, including 129 law enforcement officers. I was 5 months old then, and the stories of my parents are very surprising, because now our city is very quiet and almost nothing happens.